made his way out behind home plate, behind this utility shed. But again, Barton, and one can only imagine how much of the emotion that he obviously showed there every time he talks is linked to his 10-year-old son being there with him and trying to protect him at the same time. But he again talked about the role of Capitol Police and that they responded, and he used the word attacked. They attacked this James Hodgkinson and put him down and prevented him from doing more damage.
And they're lucky, Jeff, too, that they had a member of the leadership there. Otherwise, there would have been no armed security there. That's the other thing that I keep reflecting on. That had Steve Scalise not been there, there would not have been somebody there with weapons on the scene. They're very fortunate.
Let's go now to Major Garrett at the White House. We will hear momentarily from the President of the United States.
Yes, we're not exactly sure how soon we'll be hearing from the president. Could be 2 minutes, could be as much as 5 minutes, but the president is going to make remarks. You see that live picture from the White House pool position in the diplomatic room here at the White House. The president's not going to take any questions. 6 to 7 minutes of prepared remarks read off a teleprompter. And as I was mentioning before we went to Congressman Joe Barton for that very emotional rendition of his recollection of this tragedy this morning at that Alexandria baseball field, this is a moment for the president, one that every president, whether they want to or not, encounters during their presidency, in which they have to put the senseless into some form of context, put violence, put a pastoral setting. What could be more pastoral than a baseball field just after dawn where a few members of Congress are taking batting practice for a charity baseball game? How more gentle an atmosphere could you have than that in Washington, D.C.? I can't think of one. And yet violence broke out. A senior member of the House Republican leadership, Steve Scalise, is in a hospital having just emerged from surgery, being shot in the hip. 4 other victims of the shooting violence. And for the President of the United States, it is now up to him, as the burden of this office often visits upon the sitting president, to describe not only his reaction, what he believes happened, describe the political context if he believes there is one. Some Trump supporters on Capitol Hill have already begun to say there's a political atmosphere that has become poisonous that might have had something to do with this. The president's going to have to decide whether or not he wants to weigh in on that at this particular moment. All of that on the shoulders of the President of the United States as he prepares to talk to the country in the aftermath of what can only be described as among the most shocking events to be visited upon members of Congress in recent memory.
Major, as you know very well, it is at these moments of hope and a bit of fear, too, that we ask our presidents to be at their best in terms of summoning their own sense of why this is important, their own eloquence to speak. We saw it with President Reagan at the time of the Challenger disaster. We saw it when President Clinton went to Oklahoma City. This is a moment in which the president tries to become the voice of America.
That's right. President Obama after Sandy Hook, President Obama after the Charleston church shooting. Many, many presidents in the modern era of electronic communication, when in this moment you speak to the entire country, and in this moment President Trump will probably be speaking to the entire world. What do you say? What do you not say? What areas do you try to put into context and wrap your rhetorical arms around, and what things do you leave for another day or leave for the investigation to bring more clarity to? All of this, I guarantee you, is being weighed and sifted, probably up to the very moment the president takes the podium there at the diplomatic room, by those trying to put together the best words for him and those he's most comfortable with. I've talked to presidents about this in the aftermath of events like this. It's not just the words written for them. It's words they're most comfortable with and that they most genuinely want to convey. Yes, lots of presidents, every president has a team of speechwriters. So does President Trump. But in these moments, it is the president's own sense of character, own sense of mission, own sense of emotional balance that oftentimes decides which words to use, how to use them, and what to tell the country.
You're so right, Major. You're so right, Major. A speechwriter can only take you so far. I think what people are listening for and looking for now is what will be the president's emotional state when he delivers his speech. You said he's not going to take any questions. Do you have any idea, other than Steve Miller, who might have helped him with his speech?
Well, I guarantee you Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, would be heavily involved in this. Reince Priebus has tremendous relationships on Capitol Hill, knows Steve Scalise very personally. I have to believe that Mike Pence, the vice president, would also be weighing in on this because he also has deep relationships with the House of Representatives. So does Kellyanne Conway. Lots of people will want to involve themselves in this and try to strike exactly the right note of empathy, sympathy, a national sense of grief, but also a sense that democracy is larger than any moment like this. I suspect, I don't know. I'm interpreting based on my history covering American presidents in traumatic moments like this. And then there's always room for who the president is and who the president wants to be in moments like this. And that is always the biggest and sometimes the most historically important variable of a moment like this.
And we underline the point that this is the first challenge of this kind for this president since he has been in office after January 20th, 2017.
Right. He definitely had to deal with the horrific video that appalled all of the world in Syria with that gas attack and his military action. That was a crisis for sure. That was something that his White House had to distill, make a decision on, and put a battle plan together rapidly and then deal with the aftermath. So it's not as if there hasn't been a significant event that this White House has had to cope with. There have been. But this is the first one in America that has not only riveted the country's attention, but perhaps created a sense of unease about what is the context, what is the tone, what is the atmosphere of our political conversation. And this president has said many times he's at the center of something that is very harsh, unrelentingly critical of him, in some cases disbelieving of the fact that he's a legitimate president. And that eats at this president. He's made that clear in his tweets and other public utterances. It bothers those who work closest to the president, who want the country to at least give him a break and at least accept him as a legitimate 45th president of the United States and not have rancor of the kind that they believe they've seen visited upon the White House every single day. The president may wade into that, or he may save that for another day. That's one of those decisions only he can make. He can be advised on, but it'll be his own center of gravity, politically and otherwise, that will determine how far, if at all, he goes in that direction.
And the tragedy is there, trying to shoot and perhaps attempting to kill members of Congress. The president speaks to that at a time in which we do not know. The FBI, the investigation continues, whether this is political, whether it's personal, or something else.
We don't. And the safest place in a moment like this for a president is to leave that which is unknown, and unspoken, and not jump ahead of what is actually being suggested or speculated. It's extremely important for presidents always to know what they know, speak to what they know, and have conviction about that part of their voice and their statement. And we'll see how the president handles that aspect of it here in just a couple minutes.
Does it mean anything major that he's delivering this speech from the diplomatic room? We see the portrait of George Washington behind the podium, and we just saw a very quick glimpse of Ivanka Trump as she entered the room.
I'm not sure if there's anything symbolically outsized in terms of its importance. It's a obviously beautiful place. There are many beautiful places from which to speak in the White House. That goes without saying. But it is more attractive and more somber than, for example, the briefing room. The briefing room is the plainest real estate on the White House. Here's the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
As you all know, shortly after 7 a.m. this morning, a gunman opened fire on members of Congress and their staffs as they were practicing for tomorrow's annual charity baseball game. Authorities are continuing to investigate the crime, and the assailant has now died from his injuries. The FBI is leading the investigation and will continue to provide updates as new information becomes available. Congressman Steve Scalise, a member of House leadership, was shot and badly wounded and is now in stable condition at the hospital, along with two very courageous Capitol police officers. At least two others were also wounded. Many lives would have been lost if not for the heroic actions of the 2 Capitol Police officers who took down the gunman despite sustaining gunshot wounds during a very, very brutal assault. Melania and I are grateful for their heroism and praying for the swift recovery of all victims. Congressman Scalise is a friend, and a very good friend. He's a patriot, and he's a fighter. He will recover from this assault. And Steve, I want you to know that you have the prayers not only of the entire city behind you, but of an entire nation and, frankly, the entire world. America is praying for you, and America is praying for all of the victims of this terrible shooting. I spoke with Steve's wife, Jennifer, and I pledged to her our full and absolute support, anything she needs. We're with her and with the entire Scalise family. I have also spoken with Chief Matthew Verderosa. He's doing a fantastic job, of the Capitol Police, to express our sympathies for his wounded officers and to express my admiration for their courage. Our brave Capitol Police perform a challenging job with incredible skill, and their sacrifice makes democracy possible. We also commend the brave first responders from Alexandria Police Fire and Rescue who rushed to the scene. Everyone on that field is a public servant. Our courageous police, our congressional aides who work so tirelessly behind the scenes with enormous devotion, and our dedicated members of Congress who represent our people. We may have our differences, but we do well in times like these to remember that everyone who serves in our nation's capital is here because, above all, they love our country. We can all agree that we are blessed to be Americans, that our children deserve to grow up in a nation of safety and peace, and that we are strongest when we are unified and when we work together for the common good. Please take a moment today to cherish those you love, and always remember those who serve and keep us safe. God bless them all. God bless you. And God bless America. Thank you.
President Trump at the White House, the president saying that the assailant is dead and expressing the country's thanks to the first responders, both from Alexander and from the D.C. Capitol Police for their heroic action. But the important point coming out of here is the assailant is dead. We don't know what they have learned from him, but that investigation continues.
That is the first time we heard that. He also made a point of singling out Steve Scalise, who he called a friend, a fighter, and a patriot, and said he had reached out to his wife to let her know that the country's praying and pledged any support that they can give to the family.
The president did not provide any more information on the 2 Capitol police officers who were injured. We know they're in the hospital as well. Also, 2 other officers were injured, we know, but are not hospitalized. Interesting you talk about the tone, Charlie, before with Major and what the president said. They're somber, but strong there. Just a few minutes. Stayed away from any mentions of overt political references or terror. It was more just talking about law enforcement, the importance of law enforcement. As we heard Joe Barton say, who was there with his son, Steve Scalise is a member of leadership. Yeah. If Steve Scalise had not been there with leadership, Capitol Hill Police would not have been there. And it may have been a dramatically different situation. Mm-hmm. We're still waiting to get more information on the shooter beyond what the president just said. We do know that James Hodgkinson is dead. 66 years old. There's a picture of him. He is from Illinois. He was, according to law enforcement, carrying an M4. He came to this baseball field, was behind the third base line for some reason then came up on it and then eventually emerged behind home plate and a utility shed, they say.
Yeah, that he actually never got on the field.
Never got on
the field, yeah.
But at some point, this gun battle that broke out during a congressional baseball practice took place. And as Joe Barton mentioned, Capitol Hill police ended up, in his words, attacking Hodgkinson, putting him down, and he has since died of those injuries. Jeff Pegues, also in Washington. Jeff?
Yeah, the president called it a brutal assault. That's how he described this attack on this baseball field early this morning, with this assault weapon similar to an M4 is what we're being told now. Not sure that it is an M4, but we're told that it's similar to an M4 regardless. This is what it looked like, and especially to the people who were in the line of fire. There were several people in the line of fire, as we've heard now from numerous witnesses, and several shots fired. Between 15 and 30, some say, also more than 50, others say. And it is not unusual for witness accounts to have varying degrees of accuracy, especially this early on. It was a traumatic scene out there for anyone who was in the line of fire, certainly, even those who weren't, but witnessed the shooting from several feet, several yards away, a distance away, to see this unfolding. And it was unfolding over several minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. 10 to 15 minutes, we've heard from varying witnesses. We know, according to law enforcement officials, like Capitol Police, some have described it as attacking the suspect, but they were certainly trained, even though they were wounded, to go toward the danger instead of away from the danger. And it was the Capitol Police, as we all know now, who took the suspect down. But there was also praise from the president for Alexandria police, who were on the scene, according to their police chief, within 3 minutes. So it was the Capitol Police, local police responding to this incident. And now you have a combination of police agencies investigating, led by the FBI. The FBI telling us that they feel like they have a pretty good handle on what is happening in terms of the investigation. That said, we still don't know what the motive was. And now, as the president revealed, the suspect has died. He was wounded, obviously, and now he has succumbed to his injuries. So that may complicate efforts to figure out a motive, but we know where he is from, Belleville, Illinois, 66 years old, James T. Hodgkinson. The question is, why was he here in this area? And was this some sort of politically motivated attack? We just don't know at this time.
A lot of questions about Mr. Hodgkinson today. Thank you very much, Jeff Pegues. We're waiting to hear from Nancy Pelosi, Democratic leader, and Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. They will be speaking live at noon. Of course, we will bring it to you at that time. We heard from Senator Rand Paul this morning, who said that there were about 15 to 20 members of Congress on the field, 40 people total on the field, but 15 to 20 members. They were there, as you know, practicing for the annual baseball game. And one of the people who was on the field at that time is Congressman Jeff Duncan. Nancy Cordes joins us with more on his part of the story.
Well, Gail, Duncan is a Republican from South Carolina, and he was in this all-members briefing that has been taking place with the House Sergeant-at-Arms. He came out a short time ago and told reporters that he had interacted with the shooter this morning. Take a listen to what he had to say.
So I was there at baseball practice this morning. I actually left right before the shooting happened and had an interaction with who I believe was the shooter based on the profile that I saw on TV. I've given a statement to the Alexandria Police Department this morning. After I heard about the shooting, they asked me to come down there because I did have an interaction with someone in the parking lot who asked me if the team practicing was a Democrat or a Republican team. I told him they were Republicans. He said, "Okay, thanks," turned around. I got in the car and left, find out that my Republican colleagues were targeted by an active shooter today.
Do you believe you were targeted because you were Republicans?
I'm sorry?
Do you believe that your teammates were targeted because they are Republicans?
Based on the question he asked me, I would make that assumption because he asked me if this team was the Republican or Democrat team practicing. I responded that it was a Republican team practicing, and he proceeded to shoot Republicans. You take that for what it's worth.
Can you describe why you believe that this was the shooter? Was it because of the description you got from police? Or?
Yeah, based on who I saw, and the description I gave of the Alexandria Police Department fits the picture that is being shown on TV right now.
Do you have a T-shirt on that had any kind of partisan?
What I recognized was a red shirt, reddish. I didn't see anything in his hands. Didn't see any partisan stuff on his body and his clothing. I saw the individual. I know what he asked me. I know how I answered. I know what happened. So I'm making the assumption that he was targeting Republicans based on what he did. I actually fist bumped Scalise on the way off the field because I run around the mound, and then we get to the parking lot. DeSantis is already in the car. I'm getting in when this guy approached us.
How are you feeling today? How are you feeling right now?
I'm shaken up. My colleagues were targeted today by somebody that wanted to kill him. Trent Kelly from Mississippi played third base when DeSantis left. He's one of my best friends, and he was the closest person to the shooter, so he was targeted first, and by the grace of God, he was missed. And he zigzagged across the field as the guy continued to shoot, and he saw the whip, Steve Scalise, get hit. I don't think he'll ever, and this guy fought in Iraq. He's a war veteran and an active duty National Guardman from Mississippi. He's faced fire before, but not in a baseball uniform, not in a peaceful setting and practicing the American sport of baseball. But he zigzagged across the field to get away from an active shooter who was targeting Republicans and hit another friend of ours in the whip, Scalise. And so I would ask everyone just to exercise calm and reflection and pray for my colleagues who were wounded, and my colleagues that were affected because they were on the field when this happened, and really the whole Congress that is going to be affected by this going forward. The world changed a little bit for us as members, and so I just encourage everyone across America to pray for our nation and for their elected officials here in Congress as we work our way through this, and I'm going to try to go to the briefing. So thank y'all.
That was Congressman Jeff Duncan of South Carolina describing his brief encounter with the man who he believes was the shooter this morning at that baseball practice. Now, in about 10 minutes, the House floor will be opening for the day. As we've talked about, all votes have been canceled, but the House floor will open. The House Speaker, Paul Ryan, will speak first, and then the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, and they have asked all House members to be on the floor in about 10 minutes. So that will certainly be a moving picture. Everyone there paying tribute to the victims together, Gail.
All right. Thank you, Nancy.
Well, as we have taken note of this emotional place this Congress of the United States will hear from the Speaker of the House and the ranking minority member, as we have heard already from the President. The suspect, as we have learned in this morning's attack, has died. So we'll check on the 5 other people who were shot. The House Majority Whip, Stephen Scalise, is out of surgery this morning. The number 3 Republican in the House of Representatives was shot in the hip. President Trump said a short time ago that Scalise was badly injured, but is now in stable condition. He was the only member of Congress to be hurt.
One congressional aide was also shot this morning. He is Zachary Barth, who works for Texas Congressman Roger Williams. Barth says on his Facebook page that he will be okay. His mother says he called the family after the shooting with that same message. You can imagine how relieved they are.
One member of Congress at the scene says that MIKA may have the most serious injuries. He's a former congressional aide, now a lobbyist for Tyson Foods. He was shot in the chest, we are told. The U.S. Capitol Police Chief has not identified the 2 officers who were shot in this morning's attack, but he says they're in good condition and have no life-threatening injuries. If we heard the president correctly, so it was at least 2 officers were injured.
Yes.
As far as we know.
Yes, and one of them fired while he was injured.
One thing we should point out, too, is that the police said this is an isolated incident, and that they have believed that this was not part of any other kind of incident.
That's a very good point, Charlie, because all the law enforcement officials made a point of saying the community is safe.
Right.
They kept emphasizing that over and over again. The community is safe this morning in Alexandria, Virginia.
It's safe, and we saw the president just call for unity. And I know a lot of congressional activities have been canceled today, but can you imagine what the scene will be if and when this game goes on tomorrow evening?
It's supposed to go tomorrow.
It was scheduled to happen.
A sense of tribute to those people who had to live through this and to the heroes who made it much better than it might have been.
We've been getting updates from Senator Jeff Flake, who was at the field when the shooting happened. Let's take a look back at his first interview that we had with him not long after the attack this morning.
I was the first out to Steve, and then Brad, another member from Ohio, who's a physician, came out, and we applied pressure on the wound.
He seems okay to you?
Yeah, he was coherent the whole time, but boy, he laid out laid out there for at least 10 minutes alone in the field, and we couldn't get to him while there were shots. It's right here, field.
Did the shooter say anything?
Not that there was a lot of yelling going on, but to tell you the truth, some of the other members had different angles, so they may have heard him yell something, but I didn't. But the two security detail, I think. The woman was Crystal, is her name, was shot I think pretty early, and she went down, and so the other gentleman was returning fire.
So it's a female police officer?
Female, yeah, Capitol police officer. She's wounded. She was taken airlifted.
Someone was maybe shot in the head. Is that right?
No, there was I think a gentleman by the name of Matt was shot in the chest, and so he was taken, I think, by ambulance.
And just what do you make of this?
What do you make of it? You have no idea. You have no idea. But I got Steve Scalise's phone and called his wife, and I just didn't want her to wake up and hear the news and not know what was going on. So I talked to her.
Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona.
Chuck Flashman, Marty, the photographer, was there. I think Mo Brooks came in. During that time, you'd see more and more pile in. I think there were about 12, some staff, some members, maybe 6, 8 members in the dugout. But like I said, there were people hiding behind trees. There's a dog park over there, and I think there are always people over there, so I think they were running the other direction.
You said 10 minutes to get the gunman down, but you had security details. What took so long?
He had a lot of ammo, and I think he must have been secured behind the third base dugout for a while, so it was tough to get to him.
You took a tactical standpoint.
It seemed so. Initially, he was right out in the open. Marty, our photographer, saw him raise the gun for the first time, the rifle, but he said he thought, why in the world is somebody bird hunting out here at this time? Just, I looked like 40s, maybe 50.
White,
dark hair, white, with a blue shirt on. I think jeans. My view of him was just quick behind the dugout, and then when I realized he had a line of sight into the dugout with all the members there, then we obviously went back down quickly.
And there were reports of 50 to 100 gunshots. Obviously, that was because Capitol Police were returning fire.
Yeah, that 50 would be an understatement, I'm quite sure.
Senator, we're now being joined by a national audience. Can you recap exactly what you saw?
Well, we were doing batting practice, and there are a number of members and staff fielding. Steve Scalise was on second base, playing second base, fielding balls, and all of a sudden we heard a very loud shot. Everybody thought that sounds like a gun, and the gunman was over by the third base dugout with a clear view of the field and everybody on it. And then all of a sudden a couple more shots, and we knew what it was. And I just remember seeing some gravel, bounce up as shots were coming near us. And so we climbed into the dugout and tried to get our own people engaged. Some people were calling 911. It was at least 10 minutes because we were applying pressure to one of the staffers was shot in the leg, and we got a belt out and put that on. And we could see Steve Scalise out into the field. He dragged himself after he was shot from near second base about 10 or 15 yards into the field, just to be, I think, a little further away from the gunman, but he was laying motionless out there. And so I wanted to get to him, but there were still shots going overhead from both sides. And so finally, when we heard that the shooter was down, I just ran low out to Steve and started putting pressure on the wound. and then we, for about 10 or 15 minutes, did that until the medics arrived.
Senator, how many members of Congress were here? And we see at least a few young people.
About 25.
Both
few
parties?
young people. No, this is
all
Republicans. Yeah, yeah. The game is tomorrow. So this is we've been doing this I've been in Congress for 16 years. This is my 16th year doing this.
And what is it? Tell for those who don't know about what was going on
we have a congressional baseball game. It's for charity. This year we'll raise about $650,000 for some underprivileged kids here in D.C. And so it's one of the longest institutions in Congress. The roll call trophy goes to the winner, and it's a great event. About 10,000 people get out to the game. So it's a game for charity we do every year.
Republicans versus Democrats at Nat Stadium.
At Nat Stadium.
And this was your final practice beforehand.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, the game is scheduled to be played tomorrow. But I hope Steve's okay. I did call his wife. I got his phone and called his wife to make sure that when she woke up she didn't hear news that and let her know that I thought that he was certainly going to be okay.
That was Senator Flake from Arizona earlier this morning. At moments like this, we hear both eloquence and we recognize courage. Here's what Joe Barton, the congressman from Texas, who's there with his son, who was also participating in the baseball, said, "I hope we continue the game. In some ways, this is what democracy is about."
He's right about that. It will be interesting to see what decision they make on that.
Some riveting descriptions all morning long from members of Congress who were there and watched this unfold over an agonizing period of time. By the way, as they talk about Representative Scalise sitting there, lying there on the field, and they couldn't get to him because the shots were still being fired as they tried to put down this gunman. We do have some new information on the gunman and some of the online postings that he was making, and Jeff Pegues, again in Washington, has more on that. Jeff?
Yes, Jeff, typically when law enforcement tries to put together a profile of a suspect, what they look at first is social media. And according to what we've learned here at CBS News, this suspect, James T. Hodgkinson from Belleville, Illinois, 66 years old, left a trail of information for investigators on his social media pages, including Facebook. There were some anti-Trump postings on his Facebook page. I'm just going to read a few of them to you. Quote, "Trump is a traitor. He has destroyed our democracy." Quote, "It's time to destroy Trump and co." I suspect he meant company there. And so those are just two of the postings that we have. Those were posted in March. He also called Republicans, quote, "clowns." So for those who think, and Senator Rand Paul mentioned this, that maybe this was politically motivated, this is the type of information that suggests that perhaps it was. It is still early. The FBI is leading this investigation, and they're still searching for a motive officially. But as we heard from FBI officials earlier today, they feel like they have a pretty good handle on this investigation. Now, it's unclear what that means, but clearly they have some information that leads them closer, perhaps, to a motive in this case. And when you look at this social media and these postings that were allegedly put on social media by this suspect, it suggests that, yes, he was following politics, certainly in Washington. He had put on his social media pages anti-Trump postings, several. What I read to you was just a sampling. And so this is information that investigators will look to as they try to put together a pieces of this puzzle. It is still early on. There is still a lot more information to gather. Specifically, and I've said this before, why was he in D.C., in this area? Alexandria at that moment. Were there any other threats from this man to members of Congress? That is something that Capitol Hill Police would have investigated. Was he on their radar? And so these are all questions that investigators are looking at, and we're looking at too.
Thank you, Jeff. As you know, also in a world of social media, people do leave a trail. We have this footnote to what I said earlier. They have announced that the game will continue and will be held.
I think a lot of people will be glad for that decision, yes, to show that democracy is in action. And all the congressmen that we've talked to and senators have said this is a unifying moment. It's certainly a time, as acrimonious as the political climate is, this is certainly a time for bipartisanship, and everybody seems to be on the same page.
The talk is of unity, not division.
That's right. Everybody seems to be on the same page about that America is a great country, and we will continue. Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill. We are just moments away now from hearing from House Speaker Paul Ryan and Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. We'll join Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill with that part of the story.
And Gail, I can tell you that members of Congress reacted with applause when they learned that the congressional baseball game will go on tomorrow as scheduled. Let me read you just one response from one Congressman, Eric Swalwell of California. He said the congressional baseball game is on. We will play for charity, but also for the victims and the heroic officers who took down the shooter. So there were many members who felt that it was symbolically important that this game take place as planned, so that members of Congress could show that they were not daunted by this act of violence, and so that they could show their respects for the people who were injured. Now, we are awaiting Paul Ryan to speak on the House floor, but in the meantime, Bernie Sanders is speaking on the Senate floor, so let's take a listen.
Congressional staff and the Capitol police officers who were wounded make a quick and full recovery. I also want to thank the Capitol Police for their heroic actions to prevent further harm. Thank you, Madam President.
So a brief comment from Bernie Sanders on the Senate floor. The shooter, as we know, had expressed messages of support for Sanders on his social media pages, and Sanders has responded by saying that he has prayers for all of the victims and is asking everyone to come together. Members of the House are now streaming onto the House floor, which is going to be opening any minute now with a prayer and with speeches both from the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, and the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi. They all just received a briefing from the House Sergeant-at-Arms about security here at the Capitol in the wake of this morning's incident. They learned more about the incident itself, and now they are coming together to hear what their leaders have to say. We know that Paul Ryan, who sleeps most nights here at the Capitol, as many members do, was in the House gym this morning when he learned about the shooting, a shooting that affected people he knows and cares about very deeply. Steve Scalise, who is a member of his leadership team. It's just 4 people. It's a very tight-knit team. And there you see House members streaming out of that security briefing and making their way to the House floor.
All right, Nancy Cordes. We are waiting, of course, to hear from Nancy Pelosi. Thank you. You know, everybody keeps giving tribute to the 2 police officers, and I wanted to think about them for just a second, because here you are at a baseball diamond, clearly a soft target. They're not even on alert. They're not even on alert. So I'm very curious to hear exactly what they were doing when the shots broke out.
Well, they have to be on alert, right? Maybe at all times.
I don't know, Jeff. I think you're thinking we're there, we're watching Steve Scalise. You know, it's different if you're going into a situation as an officer and you know that this is a dangerous situation. I think that you have a different kind of stance about you. Are you looking around? Are you scanning the crowd? I don't think that's the case at 6:30 to 7:30 this morning.
It is a target that is much softer than one would think other targets would be. It's 7:09 a.m.
There's the Speaker of the House walking in right now, Paul Ryan, preparing to talk to members of Congress who are anxious to hear as much as they can and understand the implications of what happened this morning in Alexandria, Virginia. Following him is Nancy Pelosi. She is the former Speaker of the House, and now the ranking minority member.
And we talk about unity. There's unity right there. At least them walking in to get Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi walking up to potentially make this statement together. But as Jeff Pegues pointed out on the suspect's homepage, the anti-Trump, anti-president messages. There are also some indications from social media of the pro-Bernie Sanders messages. You saw Bernie Sanders speaking there. We saw Bernie Sanders tweet saying that the violence has to stop.
Yeah, Nancy Cordes, we're going to go back to you on Capitol Hill, because you're hearing that members of Congress had been worried about security. True?
That's right. Ruben Gallego, who was in that all-members briefing, just came out a few minutes ago and told us that members have been getting a lot of death threats lately, and that they asked in that meeting about the possibility of using campaign funds to pay for security. So this is clearly a widespread concern and had been before this morning's incident. We've heard a number of lawmakers today say that they are shaken up, that they are concerned about their personal safety when they walk around, that they're more concerned than they were just a few hours ago. And a number of them have also expressed deep concern about the political atmosphere in this country and political rhetoric and the way that it can spin people up, pit people against each other, and in some cases, obviously, pit people against their members of Congress, Gail.
Hearing that, Nancy, on both sides of the aisle?
Yes, Ruben Gallego is a Democrat, and a number of Democrats, just like Republicans, have gotten those death threats. You know, over the years, there have been people whose windows at their congressional offices in their home districts have been smashed by rocks. In a sense, it's something that they sort of take as part of the territory. They try to go about their daily lives. They know that they will get death threats the same way that many people who are in the public eye get death threats. They try not to take it that seriously most of the time and assume that it's all talk and not necessarily any action. But clearly, sometimes it is action, and they don't know when those times will be. And I think it's notable that someone like Gallego, a longtime member of Congress, is saying that his colleagues are asking if they can pay for security out of their own personal campaign funds. You know, aside from Scalise and a few other members of leadership, these members of Congress do not walk around with any security detail whatsoever. You see them not just here at the Capitol, but all over Washington, D.C. and in their home districts. And they are, in many ways, ordinary citizens without any protection. And yet they're highly visible citizens. And there are a lot of people who have strong feelings about the policies that they back and the policies that they oppose. Just looking at any member of Congress's Twitter feed and the reactions that they get, and you can see how angry people can get to the things that they say and the issues that they support. You don't expect that that's going to translate into violence, but in some situations it does, and now some members are asking what more can be done to protect them.
Nancy, and as you know better than anyone, we saw during the time that members went back home because of some of the debates in Congress, they were particularly raucous town meetings, not about threats to their lives, but clearly the level in combativeness was more apparent than ever.
Right, and I've been at some of those town halls where you can tell that the member of Congress who's up on the stage is really making a calculation about, are these people who are yelling at me simply angry and frustrated and getting their feelings out, or is there more to it than that? Is there a sinister intent behind the anger that they are showing to these members of Congress? And there were situations where members had to be hustled out by security, taken out by a back door because they were worried that the crowd was getting too spun up. Obviously, people have every right to be passionate about political issues, and in fact, that passion translates to a lot of influence in this country, whether it's on the right or the left. People know that that showing strong beliefs and getting large crowds together is the way that you influence your member of Congress, and so it can be very difficult for a member or their staff to know the difference between people who are simply exercising their First Amendment rights and want to make sure that their representative knows how strongly they feel about a given issue, and someone who has a more menacing intent.
Clearly, we saw that during a campaign, which people talk about things like, lock her up, and we saw some of the most crude political language that we had heard, even though there's a long history of political attacks in the American politics since the Founding Fathers. We did see expressions that we had not heard before. This has been a season of sort of coarse political rhetoric.
We all see that vitriol online, right? And a lot of it is anonymous and cowardly, but when it manifests itself in other ways, and we don't know exactly what he was thinking. There may be a limit to the amount that we do find out, because the suspect is now dead. But just anecdotally, yes, everyone I think sees that politics is heated, but this is
you always expect the passion, you can expect the acrimony, you can expect the anger, but you don't expect to be in danger when you're practicing for a baseball game between 6:30 and 7:30 in the morning in a suburb of Washington, D.C. Don't expect that.
And as Major Garrett rightly points out, about the most pastoral scene one can imagine in America, a baseball field, and one that became the scene of gunfire. We do have a new photo of the suspect up on the screen right now. This shows James T. Hodgkinson of Illinois taking part in a protest outside the post office. I'm not able to tax the rich, lib Congress for 70 years. He's protesting the 1%, essentially, in this picture. But
that was in Illinois, Jeff. They said back in 2012.
And he has his shades on, as he did in the picture. But something somehow drove James Hodgkinson, who it would appear from this picture has been politically active for a good number of years, to approach this baseball field and perform the unspeakable this morning.
I remind the audience at home that we're waiting to hear from the Speaker of the House and Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House. They should be addressing and speaking to members of Congress in just a few minutes.
This is from a restaurant manager, Charles O'Rear, who's from St. Louis, who said that he campaigned with James T. Hodgkinson for Bernie Sanders back during the campaign in Iowa. He describes him as a quiet guy who was very mellow, who was very reserved, and he remembers when they stayed overnight at a Sanders supporter home in Rock Island, Illinois, after canvassing for the senator. He was a union tradesman, pretty stocky, and they stayed up all night talking politics. So very passionate man he was.
Aren't they often described that way, quiet and reserved until they're not?
Until this happens.
Yeah, and we still don't know what it is that triggers them going from, whoever does dastardly acts like this, what triggers them from going from those pent-up feelings to doing something violent.
And we should mention again, we're still waiting to get a lot of information. There's a lot we don't know about James T. Hodgkinson right now. Chris Nagus is with our affiliate KMOV. He's outside the gunman's house in Belleville, Illinois. He joins us on the phone. What can you tell us?
Good morning, Jeff, Gail, and Charlie. That's right. We are outside the suspected gunman's house here in Belleville, Illinois. It's a well-kept home. When we arrived, there was nobody here. It's a private street. It's in a rural area just outside the city center. Neighbors told us they have not seen Hodgkinson in months. They tell us they feel sorry for his wife. In their words, they say she's going to bear the brunt of this. She still lives in the home, but she is not here right now.
Chamber, where we have to interrupt Chris because the Speaker of the House is about to talk. Here it is.
We ask your blessing on our brother, Representative Steve Scalise, the two officers and the staffer who have been shot. Bless the hands of those who tend to their injuries. We as Americans are blessed by a free and open society with rights secured by law and the Constitution. But once again, we are reminded that there is a vulnerability that comes with that openness. May we all be vigilant in being good citizens, neighbors, and defenders of our way of life at a time when so many challenges to our way of life and government seem under siege. We thank you for the men and women who respond to the crises that befall us, especially the Capitol Police and all first responders. May their heroism and generosity of spirit be an inspiration to us all, and may they be assured of our appreciation of their service. And in this great silence, as we are gathered most dramatically as this assembly, the People's House, may Republicans and Democrats be mindful of the rare companionship they share. Men and women who have taken very public responsibility for our country that carries so many burdens, and today the reminder, shared danger. May this day be characterized by kindness, goodwill, and compassion one to another. God bless America, and may all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The chair will lead the House in the Pledge of Allegiance and invites the members of the gallery to join. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I ask to advise and accept my remarks and address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
My colleagues, there are very strong emotions throughout this House today. We are all horrified by this dreadful attack on our friends and on our colleagues and those who serve and protect this Capitol. We are all praying for those who are attacked and for their families. Steve Scalise, Zachary Barth, Matt MIKA, Special Agent David Bailey, Special Agent Crystal Griner. We are all giving our thoughts to those currently being treated for their injuries at this moment. And we are united. We are united in our shock. We are united in our anguish. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. I know we want to give our thanks to the first responders and to the Alexandria Police Department who are on the scene in minutes. And I know this House wants to state unequivocally that we are, as ever, awed by the tremendous bravery of the Capitol Police. I spoke with Special Agent Bailey and Special Agent Griner this morning. One was being treated and one was about to go into surgery. I expressed our profound gratitude to them. It is clear to me, based on various eyewitness accounts, that without these two heroes, Agent Bailey and Agent Griner, many lives would have been lost. I know that we all want to learn as much as we can about what happened. We just all received a briefing from the Sergeant of Arms. I have complete confidence in the investigation that's being conducted by the Capitol Police, the FBI, who are also working with local law enforcement. I know we want to extend our gratitude for the outpouring of support that we've received from throughout the Capitol and from throughout the country. And now, knowing Steve Scalise, as we all do, he is likely really frustrated that he's not going to be able to play in the baseball game. I also know that Steve wants all of us to commend the bravery of those who came to the aid of the wounded. In the coming days, we will hear their stories, and we will have the chance to hold up their heroism. My colleagues, there are so many memories from this day that we will want to forget, and there are so many images that we will not want to see again. But there is one image in particular that this House should keep, and that is a photo I saw this morning of our Democratic colleagues gathered in prayer this morning after hearing the news. You know, every day we come here to test and to challenge each other. We feel so deeply about the things that we fight for and the things that we believe in. At times, our emotions can clearly get the best of us. We're all imperfect. But we do not shed our humanity when we enter this chamber. For all the noise and all the fury, we are one family. These were our brothers and sisters in the line of fire. These were our brothers and sisters who ran into danger and saved countless lives. So before this House returns to its business, let's just slow down and reflect, to think about how we're all being tested right now, because we are being tested right now. I ask each of you to join me to resolve to come together, to lift each other up, and to show the country, to show the world that we are one house, the people's house, united in our humanity. It is that humanity which will win the day, and it always will. God bless. I yield.
Purposes, Gentlelady from California seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to join the distinguished speaker in paying tribute to the brave men and women of the Capitol Police Force, and also in sadness for the assault that was made on our colleagues and members of the staff. To my colleagues, you're going to hear me say something you've never heard me say before. I identify myself with the remarks of the speaker. They're beautiful remarks, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much. For the sentiments that they represent, thank you so much. Again, we are not one caucus or the other in this House today, but we speak for each other in saying that we send our thoughts and prayers to our colleague, Steve Scalise. Personally, we have our Italian-American connection, so as soon as I heard his name, I was filled with concern, as I would be for anyone here, but we have that special connection, so our hopes and prayers. And I said to the Speaker, I'll be asking you every 5 minutes, how is Steve coming along? And also for Zach Barth in Congressman Roger Williams' office, MIKA, who was a former staffer, and of course, as the Speaker acknowledged, Crystal Griner and David Bailey. And acknowledging their sacrifice and how fortunate we all were that they were on the scene, because other lives would have probably been lost, I want us to remember that every single day, the Capitol Police protects all of us, takes risk for us. And while a day like this is a time when we can focus on it, so sadly, it doesn't mean that other days aren't as challenging. And I especially want to call attention to Detective John Gibson and Officer Jacob Chestnut, who almost 19 years ago, 1988 it was, in July, lost their lives protecting the Congress, the Capitol. And not just the members of Congress, the staff, the press, and our visitors, people who come to see this Capitol, this great edifice to democracy known throughout the world. So they are protecting a great deal. And it is an attraction. And that makes it all the more risky. You may not know this, my colleagues, but every time I pray, which is very frequently, and certainly every Sunday, I pray for all of you together. In the earlier years, I used to pray for your happiness, for the fact that we would, working together, heed the words of President Kennedy in the closing of his inaugural address when he said, "May God's work must truly be our own." How do we view what God's will is for us? How do we come together to give confidence to the American people that, as our founders intended, we would have our disagreements and we would debate them and we would have confidence in our beliefs and humility to listen to others? But in more recent years, I have been praying not only for that, but for our safety. As I, above anyone in here, and I can say that quite clearly, have been probably the target of more, well, I'm the political target and therefore the target of more threats than anyone, perhaps other than the President of the United States, Barack Obama. And so I prayed for Barack Obama, and now I continue to pray for him, and I pray for Donald Trump, that his presidency will be successful and that his family will be safe. Because it is about family. We are called for a purpose to this body. It's a great thing. And we know what it means to each of us to serve, and we recognize that in others. And we also recognize that you have your constituents, we have ours, and we respect you and your constituents who sent you here, all worthy of respect. But we do have our differences. And so I pray, my prayer is that we can resolve our differences in a way that furthers the preamble to the Constitution, takes us closer to e pluribus unum. And today, again, it's in the family. It's an injury in the family for the staff and for our colleague and for his leadership. As I mentioned just a minute ago in the Fuller thing, sports are a wonderful thing in our country. Probably one of the most unified. I think the arts, we like to say music or plays or whatever, but sports really bring us together in our cities. You see people who have the biggest differences of opinion on politics, and yet when their team is on the field, people come together. People come together. So when this team was on the field practicing with such camaraderie and such brotherhood, I don't know if you have any sisters on your team. We have two on our team. For this person to take this action was so cowardly, so cowardly. We'll learn more about motivation and the rest of that. But it seems particularly sad, although any violent death, of course, is sad, but particularly sad that at a time when people want us to come together and we're prepared to come together tomorrow night, that this assault would be made. But we cannot let that be a victory for the assailant or anyone who would think that way. So tomorrow we'll go out on the field, we'll root for our team, we want everyone to do his or her very best, and we will use this occasion as one that brings us together and not separates us further. And with that, again, I want to thank the Speaker for bringing us together, and again, with endless gratitude to our Capitol Police, in particular today, of course, Crystal Griner, David Bailey, but never out of our prayers, Detective John Gibson and Officer Jacob Chestnut. Thank you, my colleagues, for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you on this sad day. Steve and others, you are deeply in our prayers. We count the minutes until you return. Please convey that to him, Mr. Speaker. Thank you all.
From the House chamber, Paul Ryan, Republican, Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, saying similar things. Paul Ryan saying an attack on one is an attack on all. Nancy Pelosi saying e pluribus unum. out of many won. So here we have the call for reconciliation, the call for unity on part of the two leaders of the House of Representatives.
Yeah, the message very, very similar. United in shock and anguish is what Paul Ryan said, and I like Nancy Pelosi saying it's an injury that's in the family. No politics here about this one.
Yeah, and we got some more information from both Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi about the officers injured. According to them, Agent David Bailey and Agent Crystal Griner, both of whom apparently played instrumental roles in putting down this shooter so he could not do further damage. Nancy Pelosi, Nancy Cordes, my apologies, also on Capitol Hill right now. Nancy, what do you have?
Well, it was a pretty moving scene there on the House floor, Jeff, to see members from both sides of the aisle stand up and applaud for about 20 seconds straight when the House Speaker Paul Ryan said that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, and you could really tell that all of them were feeling the same way in that moment. Now, a short time ago, we reported that the shooter in this case had posted messages about Donald Trump on his social media pages, and that he was a supporter of Bernie Sanders in the 2016 election and had spoken a lot about him as well. Well, a short time ago, Sanders addressed that on the Senate floor. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Madam President, I have just been informed that the alleged shooter at the Republican baseball practice this morning is someone who apparently volunteered on my presidential campaign. I am sickened by this despicable act, and let me be as clear as I can be. Violence of any kind is unacceptable in our society, and I condemn this action in the strongest possible terms.
Sanders is someone who spoke out repeatedly throughout the course of 2016 about violent behavior, violent words being spoken by voters on behalf of him, on behalf of Donald Trump, on behalf of Hillary Clinton, because it was something that we saw on both sides of the aisle leading up to this very fraught 2016 election. And so for him to now find out that one of his supporters was behind this is clearly something that is deeply upsetting to him, Gail.
But Nancy, we should mention it would appear that the shooter was politically active far before 2016. We have this picture from him during a protest, I believe, just about 13 or 14 years ago, which is one of the right here, 2000. My apologies, it's 2012. So 5 years ago. This is regarding the 1% protests that came up in Occupy Wall Street in the wake of the financial crash a number of years ago. This again is James Hodgkinson of Illinois. He was 66 when he died this morning following the gunfire. There's another picture we have now of Hodgkinson, who, at least from his social media websites, was very critical of Donald Trump and very supportive of Bernie Sanders. Chris Nagus is with one of our affiliates, our KMOV. He is outside the gunman's house in Belleville, Illinois. Chris, tell us where you are and what you're seeing.
Jeff, I'll tell you, we are on Rolling Hills Lane. It's a gravel road. Let me step out of the way so I can give you a live look here. That is the gravel road that runs right up to Hodgkinson's home. It is now blocked by local police. Now, as we pan over to the right, you see the tidy, well-kept home. You talked about his political activities. There's nothing in the front yard. There's no signage, nothing along those lines that indicate what political party he was affiliated with of any kind. Now, I will tell you, when we arrived here just after 10 a.m. Central, there was nobody out here other than a couple of neighbors. They told us the gravel road was private. They didn't want any media back there. But they did tell me they have not seen Hodgkinson in months. They tell me his wife still lives here, but they say they have not seen him in months. A short time after we arrived, a number of officials showed up, including the FBI. FBI told us there will be somebody out here to brief us, to give us some updates, some additional information when they get it. But of course, right now they're still inside the house. My photographer tells me he saw several people go inside the home. They did not appear to be law enforcement. It's possible those are family members that are now meeting with police, providing details. And I can tell you, This was a quiet area out here a couple of hours ago. Now you've got local media, you've got police, law enforcement, a lot of people driving by. And one more thing I want to show you right here, this sign right out in front of the property, JTH Inspections. I know there's been a lot of talk today that this guy was a home inspector. I tried calling the phone number listed on the sign. It is disconnected. We're still trying to learn more, gather more information about what this guy did for a living just outside of St. Louis. That is the very latest here in Belleville, Illinois. I can tell you, just like your reporters in Washington, D.C., like you guys in New York, this is a fluid situation. We're going to stay on the scene and continue to gather new information. And as soon as we get it, of course, we're going to let you know. For now, I'm going to send it back to you guys in New York.
Chris, thanks. Jeff Pegues in Washington with new information about the gunman's online activity. Jeff.
Well, and Charlie, that was a pretty interesting tidbit of information from Chris Nagus there, who talked to neighbors who said that they hadn't seen him in months. And so this is the kind of information that investigators are looking for. They're also looking at his social media pages. And what we've found, we have several producers working on this. They've been scanning his social media pages. And as has been reported, there is a lot of anti-Trump, anti-GOP rhetoric that he is endorsing on his Facebook pages, including the fact that he was part of a group on Facebook called Terminate the Republican Party. And in just the last 18 hours, according to the research that we've done, and after looking at this page that allegedly belongs to the suspect, James Hodgkinson, among his final comments was this statement: thieving, cheating Republicans will cause another great recession. And this is some of the information that we're picking up from his social media pages from just the last 18 hours. The question is, where was he when he posted some of this information? That's what investigators are looking for. Was he in the Alexandria area at that time? Was he in the D.C. area at that time? And was this part of a plan? We're still early on in this investigation. Keep that in mind. But these are questions that the FBI and other officials involved in this investigation are now trying to figure out. But there is certainly something there for them to work with as they start to scan these social media pages left behind by the suspect, as we are. Now, another important aspect of this is getting a hold of his electronic devices, cell phone. Did he have a computer? And so that is something that investigators will be trying to do as well, including, of course, tracing the weapons used in this attack.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much. So many questions remain to be answered. Thanks a lot. Juliana Goldman is in the Alexandria, Virginia neighborhood where the shooting happened at 7:09 this morning. Juliana, what can you tell us about it?
Well, Gail, this is a neighborhood where people are shocked. You talk to people who are at local businesses, people who live here, witnesses, and they're clearly very shaken. We spoke to one woman who lives behind the baseball field. Her husband was out front grabbing something from his car, and she heard 10 to 12 gunshots. She went outside to check on him. She then heard another 20 to 30 shots. We spoke to another witness who was at the YMCA, which is right next to the baseball field. He was there working out, getting ready to leave. And he was told, don't leave, stay inside. He looked out the window and he saw the incident going down. He said he heard between a dozen and 20 or so gunshots. He saw the shooter, he said, who was crouching, moving from position to position and firing shots. And then he said he did later see the shooter on the ground and in handcuffs. But again, people describe this as a peaceful neighborhood. They say this is not something that you would expect here. It's very family friendly, lots of children. In fact, on that very baseball field last night, there was the Little League Championship game that was held there. And so that's why local police, the FBI, while they say that they are still, it's still too early to ascribe a motive to this tragedy, they are adamant that there's no longer a threat here, that while this is still an active investigation, the incident is over.
Juliana, thanks. We've been hearing compelling accounts all morning about what happened from Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona. He was at the baseball field, and now he joins us live from Capitol Hill. Thank you, Senator. It's been a long morning for you.
Thank you. It has.
But I'm going to ask you to tell us again, what more have you learned since your early interview this morning, literally on the field?
Well, obviously, the condition of those who were shot, with the exception of the gunman, is good. And so it looks like that they will survive, and that's the very good news. But it was, there wasn't much time to think during the time. It was just a harrowing experience. And let me just say, people have talked about the heroic action of the Capitol Police, and I just want to echo that. There would be a much different situation today in terms of those injured or killed had they not been there.
Talked to the wife of Steve Scalise at the time, I think, and wanting to be the person that alerted her before she saw it on television. Have you had any further conversations with her about the congressman's condition?
No, I'm going to hopefully go to the hospital now. But as soon as the gunfire, as soon as somebody said the gunman is down, I ran out to Steve. He had made his way off the infield, dragged himself about 10 or 15 yards, a trail of blood there, and just got pressure on the wound as quickly as I could. And then some others came out. He was coherent. That was good. We were glad to see that, but obviously he had lost a lot of blood, and we just wanted to make sure he didn't lose any more. After they took him away, one of the staff members gave me his phone and called his wife, Jennifer. I just didn't want her to hear it on the news and not know that her husband was okay and was alive. And so I was glad to be able to talk to her.
Congressman Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, said this this morning, quote, "We do not shed our humanity when we enter this chamber for all of the noise and all the fury. We are one family." Do you hope out of a tragedy like this something good can come, or do you expect something good can come?
I do. I hope that it does. It has in times past that maybe hasn't lasted as long as it should have. I hope that it lasts. I was heartened certainly by the statement that President Trump made today, and Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi received calls and text messages from so many people on all sides of the aisle. I got a call from President Obama this morning. He'd been watching the news and was concerned. I obviously reached out to Gabby Giffords, talked to her husband, Mark Kelly. Those of us in Arizona remember well that situation a few years ago. And so I sure hope that this can lead to more unity. We need it around here.
Senator Flake, you calling his wife this morning, I think, was one of the most considerate things that we've heard all morning, and I'm wondering how you had the presence of mind to do that at that moment. I know you said you wanted her to hear about it from you rather than hear it on the news, but it was so frightening and so chaotic what was happening in the moment. People really were running for their lives at that time.
Well, I know my own wife is here in Washington right now. She's usually in Arizona, but I wanted her to know as well. I just know that people waking up will turn on the news, and boy, if your husband had been shot, as Jennifer Scalise's husband was, boy, you'd not want to see that on the news. You'd want to hear it and hear that he was going to be okay, or know the condition, and know where he was going to be taken, which hospital. And so obviously I was just happy to be able to do that.
No, I thought that was a very...
Let me tell you, there were people, staff members and others who, it was one of the staff members who handed me Steve's phone and said, why don't you call his wife? There were a lot of people who really stepped up and really were heroic. They really were.
It was very hectic in the morning with Mr. Hodgkinson. Was there anything about him that stood out before the shooting started? Did you notice him at all?
I didn't see it at all. There, 30-some with members and staff, probably close to 40 people there on the field or in the batting cages, and to have somebody walking around. There's a dog park not far, and so people are always walking by that stadium. So I didn't notice him. Apparently, a few others had, or he had asked a few questions, but I only caught one glimpse of him. It was when we got into the dugout, he came around home plate on the outside of the fence, and I was trying to see if he was still active. I wanted to get out to Steve, and I stood up and saw him, and he had a line of sight to me and others in the dugout, and I quickly stepped aside so he wouldn't know that there were so many there. But that was the only glimpse of the gunman that I had.
Senator, was he saying anything at the time as all this was happening?
You know, others have said that there was yelling going on, but let me tell you, in the chaos and the gunfire, who was yelling what was indiscernible to me and a lot of my colleagues I know.
And what did your friend and colleague Steve Scalise say to you after you went to him and tried to slow the bleeding?
Well, obviously, it was with great effort that he got off the field. He wanted some water. He was obviously in a great deal of pain. And so we got some water, and I tried to keep him talking, and others came out and were doing the same thing. One of the officers came out who had been shot, I believe, in the foot. You could see the blood there. But he was still working. As soon as the gunman was down, he wanted to make sure that, that Steve and others were okay. So it was a very, very tough morning.
Senator, how do you wrap your brain? You're right. It has been a very tough morning for all of us who are watching it, who are hearing about it, and certainly you who are involved in it. How do you wrap your brain around this? You were practicing a baseball game for charity between 6:30 and 7:30 in the morning. 9 minutes after 7, shots running out. How do you process something that should have been just a normal, ordinary day, something very, very safe?
I can tell you it's the last thing any one of us would have expected. Gratefully, like I said, Steve Scalise was at practice that morning. Had he not been, there wouldn't have been anybody to return fire, and it would have been a much, much different situation. But it's the last thing you expect, a situation like this. Early in the morning, it was a beautiful, beautiful morning, and we were having a good practice, and you just don't think of something like this. So I could tell you, just a tough time.
I assume you're pleased that the games will continue.
Yes, very much so. And, you know, it's Republicans against Democrats there, but it's all for charity. We've raised, I think, over $600,000 already for this game, and it goes to great causes here in the district. So we're very glad that it'll move forward.
Can you tell us what former President Obama said?
Well, I had traveled with him out to Tucson when he gave just a great speech after Gabby Gifford's shooting, and so he just said that I hope that this does bring more unity, and he wanted me to pass on certainly his regards if he wasn't able to get to Steve or others before me, that he was praying for their good health.
You expect this to be
a nice call.
Go ahead, Gil.
How concerned are you about your own security now?
Well, obviously, it's after the Gabby Gifford shooting, it's been more on our minds than it was before, but you tend to forget, and you just certainly don't see a situation like we were in today as being one that's fraught with any danger, but obviously it'll be closer to us now.
If this was somehow connected to politics because of somebody's obsession with politics, has our politics gone too far, and what kind of corrective is there?
Well, I don't know that we can ascribe motives or anything at this point. I just know for a lot of other reasons, I hope that we can tone down the rhetoric on all sides and be a little more unified and recognize that, that there are a lot of good people trying to do good things on both sides of the aisle. And I think that we all do well to recognize that, but whether that had anything to do with this shooting today, I don't know.
Senator, realizing that a lot of this is still a blur and you're all still trying to process exactly what was taking place here, we did hear from Representative Barton who described what these two officers did as attacked the gunman proactively to prevent him from doing more damage. Can you talk more about what you saw or what others may have described to you about how all this played out from the time he first started firing?
Well, the firing started as soon as we knew it was gunfire. A number of us ran to the dugout knowing that we could go down, and there's pretty good protection there if he stayed where he was. But the firing was going on, and then all of a sudden there was firing from our side. Now, we didn't know initially if this was another gunman, and I started yelling in the dugout. I yelled out, is this friendly? Is this friendly? Are you friendly? To the person who was firing behind our dugout. And gratefully, it was a member of the Capitol Police, and he showed himself. He poked out from around the dugout. He was firing from using our dugout as a refuge as well. And I felt much better at that point knowing that he was there. But this went on for another 10 minutes. Somebody estimated over 50 rounds fired. I think that is an understatement. I think there were much more than that. It just kept going and going. Yeah, they just didn't quit. And this gentleman that was firing behind me, I believe he was the one who took down the shooter and did it with an injury, all the time. And so my hat's off to them. I'm so glad that they were there.
Senator, at any time after incidents like this, there is a conversation about guns. Do we need to have that conversation one more time after something like this happens?
I'm sure that conversation will come, but for now, I think let's remember and pray for those who are wounded.
You're right. Senator Flake, we thank you so much for your time. It's been one hell of a day. We're so glad you're all right. And as you point out, it could have been so much worse. Thank you so much, sir, for your time.
Appreciate it.
Chris Van Cleve is at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, where Representative Scalise is among those being treated. Chris, what can you tell us about the latest on the victims?
Well, Gail, we know that the congressman was brought here along with one other patient. The congressman was described as being in stable condition and in good spirits going into surgery, had an opportunity to speak to his wife. We've been watching members of Congress as well as a number of heavily armed police officers coming and going from the emergency room here at MedStar. This is a level 1 trauma center, so it is one of the places where people who have suffered traumatic injuries would be brought. I can tell you about one of the other victims, Matt MIKA. He used to work for Dave Camp, who's a congressman from Michigan, the former chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House. We understand from friends that he was shot multiple times. They are very concerned about him. We understand he's at another hospital here in the region, was brought in at least initially in critical condition. So there's a lot of concern about how badly injured MIKA is. He was a volunteer coach. He no longer works on the Hill, is a lobbyist for Tyson's Food, but was out there this morning as a volunteer coach as part of this team. We know that Zachary Barth, who is a Hill staffer for a Republican from Austin, Texas, was also wounded, as well as those 2 Capitol Police officers who we have just learned their identities. Special Agent David Bailey, who we have heard from the senator's chilling account, was wounded and continued to engage the suspect even after being struck. We have heard accounts that Special Agent Crystal Griner was wounded. She apparently yelled at the suspect, was wounded, and went down. We are still waiting for updates on the conditions of everyone here. At last report, though, everyone was alive, and that is news that everyone is hoping stays the way it is. But here at Washington MedStar Hospital, the representative is being treated. We know he's gone into surgery for that bullet wound to his hip, but was listed as in stable condition and was described as being in good spirits, if you can believe that, going into surgery. Gail?
Chris, thanks very much. But as you mentioned, it appears from reports from the scene, the most seriously injured is this Matt MIKA, who, as Chris points out, was a volunteer coach. Yeah. There showing up at 6:30 in the morning, there at 7:09 when all of this happened. And by the way, kids were there as well. Kids with their dads.
Yeah, Joe Barton's son was there.
Getting ready for this game. Major Garrett's at the White House, where earlier the president addressed the nation. Major?
Yeah, when the president gave his very brief 6 to 7 minute address, his chief speechwriter, Steve Miller, was on the side reworking the words of that speech up until the very last second. And now we know why, because as anyone who's covered the presidency knows, the president at certain times is the ultimate newsbreaker in America. And the president, in describing what happened this morning in Alexandria, Virginia, broke news nobody had heard before. Let's take a listen.
Authorities are continuing to investigate the crime, and the assailant has now died from his injuries. The FBI is leading the investigation and will continue to provide updates as new information becomes available. Congressman Steve Scalise, a member of House leadership, was shot and badly wounded and is now in stable condition at the hospital, along with 2 very courageous Capitol police officers. At least 2 others were also wounded. Many lives would have been lost if not for the heroic actions of the 2 Capitol Police officers who took down the gunman despite sustaining gunshot wounds during a very, very brutal assault. We may have our differences, but we do well in times like these to remember that everyone who serves in our nation's capital is here because, above all, they love our country. We can all agree that we are blessed to be Americans, that our children deserve to grow up in a nation of safety and peace, and that we are strongest when we are unified and when we work together for the common good.
The president did not stray into any commentary whatsoever, directly or indirectly, as to what the political context around this act of violence might have been. And in fact, for someone who ran for the presidency in the closing days, talking about coming to this city and draining the swamp, he told the nation, everyone who serves in Congress loves this country, and by definition deserves respect and some degree of support for their act of public service. That was the president's message here today. Jeff?
All right. Thank
you so much.
Thank you very much, Major. That's all anybody wants to hear right now is a message of unity. Thank you so much. Let's recap the latest. Just minutes ago, House Speaker Paul Ryan identified 2 Capitol Hill police officers wounded in this morning's attack. They're Agent David Bailey and Agent Crystal Griner. Their injuries, we're happy to report, are not life-threatening. Ryan told members, quote, they saved many, many lives by returning fire and eventually wounding the gunman who shot 5 people, including House Majority Whip Steve Scalise.
President Trump says the suspect has died from his wounds. He is identified as 66-year-old James Hodgkinson of Belleville, Illinois. His Facebook pages include messages attacking the president and supporting Senator Bernie Sanders. Sanders said a short time ago that Hodgkinson apparently volunteered in his presidential campaign. The former Democratic candidate said he is, quote, sickened by this despicable act.
House Majority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana is out of surgery. He is in stable condition. He was shot in the hip as Republican members and staff were at a baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. Video showed him being taken off the field, loaded onto a medevac helicopter.
And the baseball game they were practicing for will go on as planned tomorrow. A lot of people very excited about that. Our coverage will continue throughout the day on our 24-hour streaming network, CBSN, and on the local CBS station, and there will be a complete wrap-up on the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley. He'll report tonight from Washington.
This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Charlie Rose with Gail King and Jeff Glor. CBS News, New York.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.
Hello, everyone. I'm Errol Barnett with continuing coverage of the shooting in Alexandria, Virginia, from here at the CBS Broadcast Center in New York. President Donald Trump says the suspected gunman is dead after opening fire at a congressional baseball practice there in Alexandria, Virginia. This is just outside Washington. It all took place around 7 a.m. Eastern time as lawmakers were gathered on and around that field. Republican Congressman Steve Scalise of Louisiana was shot in the hip. He has undergone surgery. 4 others, including a congressional aide, a lobbyist, and 2 Capitol Police officers, are also wounded.
9 minutes after 7 o'clock, we received a call, a 911 call of an active shooter.
Shots being fired, and there are people running, possibly victims involved.
Everybody thought it sounded like a gun, and then boom, rapid succession after that.
There was a guy behind the third base dugout shooting a rifle. Fortunately, Secret Service was here because Steve Scalise was here.
Steve Scalise is a member of the leadership team. He's the whip, and so he has a security detail. There 2 of his detail were shot. One African-American gentleman shot in the leg, and I believe he's the one that brought the shooter down.
So the heroes are the Capitol Hill Police, Alexandria Police, and Steve Scalise's security detail.
We now want to show you the suspected gunman, 66-year-old James T. Hodgkinson. President Trump says he died of his injuries sustained after local police and security returned gunfire. Chip Reed joins us now from the scene where this all just unfolded. Chip, what, about 7 hours ago? You've been out speaking to people there. What have they been telling you about what happened exactly this morning?
Well, one of the first things they mention is what a quiet, perfect family neighborhood this is. Let me give you an idea of that. Over here, you have a park where children were playing shortly after this happened. People still felt safe after it happened. On the other side of that is a butterfly garden. And over here, you have the baseball field where the shooting occurred. And just beyond that is a dog park. There were a lot of people who had to wait in the dog park with their dogs until the police allowed them to leave to make sure the scene was clear. And then over here, you can see right by the baseball field a couple of lawnmower tractors, and that is just beyond that is the third base dugout, and that is where the shooter is believed to have entered the field. And this could have been much, much worse if you hadn't had a quick response from local Alexandria police, and even more important, by those two Capitol police officers who were here because Steve Scalise, Congressman Steve Scalise, who is a member of the congressional leadership, has security with him all the time. The others did not. If those two police officers, Capitol Hill officers, had not been here, there's no telling what might have happened here. A lot of people are really thanking them for having been here and for having risked their lives. Both were injured in taking this shooter down. But we have talked to a lot of people in the neighborhood right off the park over here who said at first they thought, is that fireworks? They weren't sure. And then they very quickly realized it was much more than fireworks. And not only did they hear gunshots, but they could tell that it was an exchange of fire, that on one side you had somebody shooting and then somebody responding. So there they were within maybe 50 to 100 yards. They couldn't see it necessarily, but they sure could hear it, and they understood that there was a major shootout going on right outside their back doors. They sent their kids into a safe part of the house. They brought the dogs and went inside themselves. You may be able to hear there are some jets flying overhead. Those are not commercial jets. Those are military jets. I don't think it has anything to do with what's going on here. That's a sound you often hear in this area. But I tell you, there were some neighbors here who just said they were completely freaked out by what happened here, because it's just not the kind of thing you expect in a very pleasant middle-class neighborhood, a commuting neighborhood for Washington, D.C.
And Chip, President Trump moments ago said the suspect has died from his injuries, but the investigation into what his motive may have been continues. The baseball game that the Republican congressmen were practicing for tomorrow is a long-standing tradition in Washington. What more can you tell us about what they were doing, and how much would have been publicly known about their location and of course, the date of their practice?
Well, it's not a secret. I mean, if you wanted to find out about it, you could certainly find out about it. I'm sure the Capitol Hill newspapers report that they come out here and practice every morning at about 6:30 to 8, and it is wonderful news. So members of Congress say that the game will be played tomorrow. It's their way of saying we're not going to, if you don't play the game, then the bad guy wins. So they are going to be playing the game. I'm not sure where the game will be, and I can guarantee you security will be extremely tight at that game, but still it's a positive gesture that they are doing that. But this game happens every year, and it is pretty intensely competitive, as you can guess by the fact that they're out here practicing from 6:30 on every morning. They do take who wins this game very seriously, especially in this partisan environment, but I don't think it's going to be that way tomorrow. Earl? And currently, Chip, the website for that congressional baseball game is promoting the location as Nationals Field, just on the other side of the Potomac, close to where you are. All plans currently are for that game to continue. Chip Reed there on the scene for us live. Thanks, Chip. We want to cross over now to our Chris Van Cleve. He is outside the hospital where Congressman Steve Scalise is being treated. And Chris, you've been there all morning watching all of the activity. What can you tell us about the congressman's condition and anyone else being treated there?
Well, we know that 2 patients from this shooting were brought here to MedStar Hospital in Northeast Washington. It's a short flight from where the shooting happened. They were brought in on the Park Police helicopter. It landed just a few feet from where I'm standing, and then it's a short walk into the emergency room back behind me there. And you can see, Errol, there's security standing outside the emergency room door. While people are being allowed in and out, the media is being kept back, and there is a very heavy police presence. We've seen officers from every jurisdiction you can imagine showing up here. Just about 20 minutes ago, 5 very heavily armed officers with long guns and body armor piled out of an SUV and went inside. We've seen some members of Congress show up as well. Representative Scalise was brought here in stable condition. We're told by his office that he was in good spirits going into surgery. He had an opportunity to speak to his wife before he went into surgery. Our CBS News colleagues have reported he is out of surgery now, stable condition. We don't know the identity of the second person who's being treated. We believe that person came in on the Park Police helicopter as well. Across town, we know that another hospital received 2 critical patients. One of those has died. The only person we have heard has died is the shooter. We don't know if that's the same person, but that's the information we have. Among the other victims, we of course have the two Capitol Police officers who, you know, their heroism today. You have heard Senator Flake speak on in chilling detail, continued to engage the suspect even after being wounded. We know both of those officers are being treated at this point. I've been speaking with a friend of Matt MIKA, the Tyson's food lobbyist and former Hill staffer, who was a volunteer coach. His friends are very concerned. The indications they have is that he was shot multiple times, excuse me, shot multiple times, including in the chest. At this point, we understand he is still alive. He is being treated, but a lot of concern about the condition of Matt MIKA, the former Hill staffer. Zachary Barth, who is another Hill staffer, was working for a Republican from Austin. His parents are on their way to Washington. We know that. He is expected to recover. He spoke to his mother by phone, saying he'd been shot but was going to be okay. His father now on his way to Washington, as are Mr. MIKA's parents. And then, of course, the congressman is recovering here, shot in the hip, by all indications in stable condition and moving towards recovery. This is a level 1 trauma center, Errol, and that is one of those hospitals that you bring somebody to if they've suffered extreme trauma. GW Hospital, another hospital here in town, that is another trauma center where some of the patients were taken. And the idea is you want to get them here as quickly as possible. We know from the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan that there is a golden hour where if you can get people to medical care within that first hour of a significant trauma, their chances of survival are much, much greater. That's why you saw the Park Police helicopter launched. It's a short flight once it's up in the air to get here to MedStar. GW Hospital, you're hearing some sirens from DC Police here in the background. GW Hospital, also a short drive if you're running lights and sirens from the Alexandria ball field. So the wounded, once that suspect was taken down, were transported to hospitals very quickly, and hopefully that helped save their lives.
Certainly the fast response by Capitol Police officers during the initial moments, and then the quick response from first responders to get victims to the hospital certainly could have saved people's lives today. Our Chris Van Cleve live for us outside the MedStar Trauma Center there. Thank you, Chris. We want to bring in Ron Hosko now. He's a former FBI Assistant Director and a CBSN security analyst. Ron, the president announcing that the suspect has died from his injuries, but as this investigation continues into motive, how important now, how valuable are these social media profiles and quite politically vocal postings of his?
Well, I think they're going to be very important. Of course, the FBI will be trying to understand what his friend network was and who he might have been communicating with in the last few days or over a longer period of time. Certainly the social media postings are a starting point, but typically, of course, the FBI will be almost certainly executing search warrants on any residents he's had contact with in recent days or weeks, on a vehicle that might be associated with him, trying to exploit any kind of media that he has, whether a thumb drive or a hard drive or an iPad, to see who he's been in touch with and see what the true inspiration was. From what I had seen before I came here today, just a political position or support for a particular candidate hardly seems enough to trigger something this violent and this thought out.
Now, the early information we have based on interviews with those who know him is that while he's from Illinois, folks near his home and on his street say they haven't seen him in months. Perhaps he has been in the Alexandria area for a few months, yet he was able to get his hands on not just a handgun, but an assault weapon. Just preliminarily, what does that tell you about his intentions, or at least how he was able to, how could he have attained those weapons?
Well, you know, lots of law-abiding Americans buy handguns and long guns every day in our country. And if you can pass the background check, I don't know of anything in this person's background as of right now that might be a disabler. But it is not hard, certainly in Virginia, to go buy a weapon, you know, go through the background process and have that weapon in your hands very quickly within hours or certainly a day or two. So none of that is hard. Buying the ammunition for it is not hard. Those folks aren't doing a Q&A about what your intentions are. They're really looking backwards to understand if there's a prohibitor in your background, so you can't take that weapon. So not hard here in Virginia, not hard in America. You know, I think the part of the questions that the FBI will be searching for right now is who else saw this person's path, you know, heading in this direction, and was there an opportunity or multiple opportunities to take him off that path, to somehow interdict him and prevent this from happening. Also, as always the case in active shooters and terrorism incidents here, the FBI and certainly Capitol Police will be scrubbing their databases to see what contacts did we have? Did we know about this person? Were there previous communications that concerned us? Should we have had security on him in some way? Should we have been looking at charges against him for some prior act or communication? Or was there nothing? Did this guy pop up from nowhere and commit this horrible crime?
Now, if it was not for the fact that Steve Scalise was there, the third highest ranking Republican in Congress, the Special Capitol Police may not have been present, and I shudder to think of how many fatalities we may be discussing right now if it were not for that fact. Would you anticipate any changes in security for lawmakers moving forward in situations like this, where there are many of them in a very public setting?
You know, Earl, 6 years ago when Gabby Giffords was shot, I was the agent in charge here in Washington, D.C., and we had many conversations with the sergeants at arms for the House and the Senate, and with the Capitol Police, a very professionally run organization, they still are, about just that question, and how in an environment where you have congressmen whose job depends on public contact, going out and pressing the flesh and engaging their constituency, how do you strike that balance? And really it comes back to, it did then, and I think it will now, being threat driven, informed by the threat, informed by the conditions around you, because we're in no place to fund a protective bubble around 435 congressmen. So, you know, it is trying to strike the right balance of engagement with the community, public appearances, access, and knowing what's out there, potentially lying in wait, and the difficulty of identifying that one person, a Jared Lochner in 6 years ago, or this person today. How do you pick that one person out and say that's who we have to, you know, be careful of and protect against?
All right, still very early stages of an incident that just took place about 7 hours ago, while CBSN security analyst Ron Hosko giving us some insight from Washington. Ron, thank you.
Sure.
And we will continue to track this developing story there in the D.C. area. But for the moment, we want to get you caught up on what else is making news around the world. In West London, at least 12 people have died after a huge fire tore through a high-rise building overnight.
Oh my God, they're screaming!
Just look at those images. It was an incredibly disturbing scene. Witnesses say people were screaming for help and yelling for their children to be saved. One bystander says he saw someone jumping out of the building in a desperate attempt to escape those flames.
Went round, I just wanted to see more. I went to the streets and I found a place and there was like 25, 30 people there. And someone, as soon as I arrived, someone just shouts, so like, look at the 17, 18 floors, look at there, look at someone is jumping. So we all looked and we saw someone just, you know, guy or girl, man or woman, I don't know. We know for a fact he's a person.
And all of this happened at the Grenfell Tower in West London. It's near the iconic Notting Hill neighbourhood, just a few miles away from Kensington Palace. Terry Okita is in London and joins us now with the latest on all of this. Terry, what's some of the new information that we now know?
Errol, this scene is so heartbreaking, I gotta tell you. As you mentioned, 12 people are confirmed dead, but unfortunately, London Metropolitan Police say that number is expected to rise. 78 people were taken to the hospital, and 18 people remain in critical condition. There are many, many more who are unaccounted for or missing, and police just can't say the number at this point. The London Fire Brigade says this fire is unprecedented in scale, speed, and spread, and it continues to be a challenge. At the height of this fire, there were about 250 firefighters on this blaze. They have gone floor to floor, 24 stories in all. 120 units, and they believe that they've canvassed most of the building at this point. They've also used drones to visually access places that they could not get to or that were hard to reach. Firefighters are expected to be out here throughout the night, and police say, Errol, that this will be a long, complex recovery process.
It's just a nightmare for those residents. Just imagine waking up to this scene, if you're lucky, at 1 a.m. Those who were able to escape. You said more than 70 people have been taken to the hospital. There are also reports from some witnesses there that they had complained to city officials about certain fire standards, certain inadequacies they noticed, but they complained that not enough was done to address it. Do we know any more about those claims?
And that's going to be part of the investigation that the city council had come out and said, we're going to look into this. So this building was actually, it was built in 1974. And in 2015-2016 period, it went through some renovations, $11 million worth of renovations. And they fixed, they said they fixed the water heaters, the water system, the windows. But people on the ground are wondering, you know, did the materials that were involved in that renovation cause or play a part in how fast and how quickly this fire spread? Because they're saying that it went up within 15, 20 minutes, and it engulfed a lot of the building. So that is definitely something that they're going to look into, because there are complaints, and they're written complaints. I've seen some of them that go back to 6 months ago at the earliest. So there were complaints even before that, but it's definitely something that is on the authorities' radar at this point.
Yeah, I bet, and it's just a stunning image. Most of that 24-story building just scorched. Terry Okita for us live in London. Thank you. Now, Washington is still reeling from the shooting in Alexandria this morning that left a congressman and 4 others wounded. It's an event which has overshadowed the many political controversies swirling there in recent weeks. Earlier, President Trump called for unity in an address to the nation.
Congressman Scalise is a friend, and a very good friend. He's a patriot, and he's a fighter. He will recover from this assault. And Steve, I want you to know that you have the prayers not only of the entire city behind you, but of an entire nation and, frankly, the entire world. America is praying for you, and America is praying for all of the victims of this terrible shooting. We may have our differences, but we do well in times like these to remember that everyone who serves in our nation's capital is here because, above all, they love our country. We can all agree that we are blessed to be Americans, that our children deserve to grow up in a nation of safety and peace, and that we are strongest when we are unified and when we work together for the common good.
Caitlin Hewan-Burns is a reporter for Real Clear Politics and a CBSN political contributor. As you see, she joins us now from Capitol Hill. Caitlin, this was really the first major domestic crisis that President Trump has had to address. How are Democrats and Republicans there on Capitol Hill responding to a very unifying message from President Trump?
Unifying indeed, and you know that the Capitol is really fraught with tension over the past several weeks especially, and you're hearing from both Democrats and Republicans praising Donald Trump's speech earlier today, really striking a bipartisan tone and calling for unity, which is really striking. As we know, just yesterday and the day before, he was painting Democrats as obstructionists when it comes to things like health care and tax reform and other agenda items too. And we also know that, before this, Democrats, 200 members of Congress had waged a lawsuit against the president. So you're seeing a lot of the tensions here kind of calm down, a lot of lawmakers really shocked and troubled by this shooting today. And that's a bipartisan sentiment. And you've heard that from Speaker Paul Ryan and from Nancy Pelosi on the Democratic side.
And I guess the cynical question then is, how long is this likely to last? I mean, as you mentioned, you have Democrats suing the president over the ways that his businesses are benefiting from his presidency. You have the investigations into Russian collusion, the Attorney General addressing the Senate Intelligence Committee yesterday. I guess there's no business left to be done today as things are put on hold, but what is the next major challenge for Congress looking ahead?
Sure. Political events certainly put on hold today inside the Capitol and outside, even events scheduled to kick off the gubernatorial race in Virginia now that primary election is over. Those kinds of events have been canceled as well. I've covered Capitol Hill during times like these, the shooting in Newtown and other moments of real tragedy. And you do have, a couple of days of bipartisanship, members really, consoling one another and talking about, a need to kind of come together around times like this. But I also know that kind of, wears off quickly as some of these issues become political. Gun control, for example, has come up in the past, and we already heard the governor of Virginia, Democratic governor of Virginia, talking about that. But right now, I will say that what's different here is that this really, involves members of Congress being shot at a practice for an event that is known to be a bipartisan, nonpartisan event raising money for charity. So there is this sense, I've been talking to lawmakers up on Capitol Hill today saying that, it's part of our job to go out there, to be public figures, to engage constituents and that sort of thing. But when this kind of thing happens, it really hits home to a lot of lawmakers, and they're more cognizant of that, especially, of course, after the shooting of Gabby Giffords a few years ago.
And when you consider things like Sandy Hook, as horrific as it was, innocent children being mowed down, there were no major policy changes in the wake of it. In a situation like this, where Capitol Hill police are being credited really with saving lives, what are some of the suggestions, if any, on what any gun control legislation would be? Or is it just way too early because everyone there is still dealing with the trauma of this morning?
Right. I think most people are really dealing with the trauma and making sure that that Congressman Scalise is in good condition, as well as staffers and members of the Capitol Police Force. There is wide bipartisan praise for the U.S. Capitol Police for doing their jobs and for what many lawmakers say saved lives. You've heard people like Rand Paul describe the events could have turned into a massacre had those police officers not been there. Details of course, Congressman Scalise. And so that's really important. And you're also hearing from Republicans and some Democrats about, let's talk more about the tone and rhetoric that we've been seeing throughout the campaign and, of course, still on Capitol Hill.
You hope for, at the very least, a more unified tone coming out of this, and, we can only hope and pray that it lasts. Caitlin Hewan-Burns, live for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you. Coming up here after a very short break, the Bill Cosby sex assault trial is now in the hands of the jury. What it means that they've taken this long to deliver a verdict. And new developments in the Flint water crisis. The head of Michigan's health department, along with a handful of others, have now been charged with involuntary manslaughter. You're streaming CBSN.